Now, gray coverage can be very simple. The thing about gray coverage is understanding depth and background. So this is also part of lifting for gray coverage. So the first step I want to talk about is lifting gray coverage. So when you're lifting, basically from 0 to 30% gray, you want to use your desired level plus your control tone. Remember, your control tone's there to control your undertone. Whenever you're lifting, you're exposing underlying pigment. That underlying pigment either is part of your formula or you have to control that part of the formula. So with 30 to 70% gray coverage when lifting, it's desired level plus control tone. When you're lifting gray coverage 70% plus, it's one level darker plus your control tone. Now, on resistant hair, you can add an addition of our 10 booster to help get that extra bit of boost or lift to that color. So gray coverage. Here's a rule I have with gray coverage, and here's what we really recommend, that whenever you're covering gray that is 70% or more, simply drop one level. By dropping one level, what that will do, that'll give you that extra foundation or depth to get the proper tonality or the richness that you desire. Nothing worse than having those hollow roots or a coverage that just isn't quite there. Remember, that's 80% of your business. So with gray coverage, we always try to recommend to start off at a 15 volume developer. Now, 20 volume developer is recommended for resistant or coarse hair. Now, if you have somebody that you've had difficulty covering gray in the past, then go ahead and use 20 volume because they probably need that extra penetration or that extra opening of that hair. Here's the rules. 0 to 30%, we use 75 to 100% desired fashion shade. We start with a 15 volume or a 10 volume, 20 of course if it's coarse or resistant. Then we would add between 0 to 25% of our foundation color. Now remember, we got 5 foundation colors to go through or to choose from, so we'll go over those in a moment. But by putting these equations together, so basically if I'm doing 75% of my fashion color and 25% of my foundation color, or my neutral, fundamental, gold, chocolate, or tobacco, then I will have the proper coverage result. Now remember, this is 0 to 30%. Now when I start getting into 70 to 100% gray, it starts flipping the other way, where I really want to do 25 to 75% of my formulation, my fashion shade, and 25 to 100% of my formula would end up going into my foundation colors or my base. So with these equations, you want to, number one, you have to determine your developer. Your developer is going to determine how much undertone you start exposing. Remember, the higher the developer, the more undertone you expose. So with gray coverage, pretty much the norm is 20 volume. However, because of the chromoprism technology we have in our hair color, we actually can slip our color in a lot smaller. So these smaller molecules actually can slide in the hair much easier. Plus, we're like double pigment on everything. So we got that pigment already there. We get that double dye load at every level. Okay, every shade, every level, it's a double pigment system. This is huge. This is great for gray coverage. This is why we are a gray coverage brand. So for gray coverage with developer choices, again, 10 volume, you can get great gray coverage. Just know the hair. 15 volume, that's a good start point. 20 volume, that is a foundation. That is your coarse hair, your resistant hair. That's your go-to. That's your start point with new clients. Then you can proceed into lowering them. So when you're covering gray, number one rule, remember, if you're using a developer that is higher than 10 volume, you are going to also have undertone. Your undertone needs to be either part of your formula or it needs to be corrected. So remember, if you're lifting hair color and you're using a 20 volume developer, you have to control that undertone. So you'll add an ash or a C series to your actual color. That will help be your control. That would be considered your fashion tone. So keep this in mind, the higher the developer, the more undertone. When you have undertone in your hair color, you are going to produce warm results. So by controlling or adding a control tone to your formulation, you'll have proper gray coverage and you'll have proper tonal control. Now, here's where we go with gray coverage. We have our foundation bases, or if we look over onto our area here, we have our foundation colors. Now above here we also have our underlying pigments sitting here, and adjacent to them are the control tones. So you can look at these control tones to choose the appropriate counteractive product to neutralize. So when we get into our foundation colors, our N series is deep coverage. This is your richest, deepest gray coverage. This is for somebody you want to just slam it home. I want to cover gray. I want it just in there. Complete 100% rich, deep coverage. Our fundamentals would become more of the softer coverage. This might be somebody who's used to using like a translucent type of color, or just has a softer natural result. Okay, still 100% gray coverage, but with a softer effect. So what I highly recommend is that you mix your neutrals with your fundamentals. So 75% of your formulation is neutral or your N series, and 25% is your fundamental series. So what will happen is that you will get a beautiful, natural looking gray coverage, neutral, soft looking gray coverage that is just gorgeous. Now the challenge with most people with gray coverage is a lot of times they don't understand that a neutral or a fundamentals, these are concentrations of dye. Whenever you add another color to a concentration of dye, you're actually diluting the background. So the rule is that for every ½ ounce of color you add to a neutral series, it actually dilutes the background or the level of lightness to darkness by 1 shade. So that could be a challenge, because a lot of times I see people adding gold to their hair color. When you add gold to your hair color, you're diluting your concentration. So that formula I just gave you, adding the neutral with the fundamental, remember fundamentals has gold already added to it. So it's not diluted, so it has a concentration of dye built in at that level. Now when you hold the neutral and the fundamentals next to each other on the color book, you're going to notice that when you look at these two side by side on our color book, the neutral is much richer than the fundamentals. So the tonality difference is, it's pretty dramatic. So you have up to a ½ to 1 shade difference on your level. So if I look at a level 7 here and a 7 here, there's about a ½ to 3/4 shade difference. So remember, the fundamentals has the gold already added in it. That gold added in reflects light differently, so visually it is a lighter color. Okay, so now when we get into coverage, our third option is gold. So with gray coverage, you also have your gold option. Now golden colors will give you more dimension, so you can add added dimension to your formulation with the addition of gold. But remember, if you're adding gold to a neutral or a fundamental concentrate, you're actually diluting the background of the level. The other color you have for options for gray coverage is you have your chocolate. Your chocolate is actually a brown base with a red-violet undertone. So it does have that deep, rich chocolate or that brown, but it also has a red-violet cast to it. So this is excellent for a base or an anchor foundation color for your cool reds. Your tobacco is a yellow-brown. So the yellow-brown is excellent for copper coverage. So adding this as your foundation or base color to your coppers will give you a true copper result with 100% gray coverage. So now that you've gone over the gray coverage, now it's about experimenting and really using your knowledge. I hope you got a great understanding of gray coverage. And I also really want to specify timing, because timing is an essential in hair coloring. Gray coverage, we recommend to start off at 45 minutes for proper coverage on 70 to 100% gray. Now with a heat source or a steamer, you can cut down some of the time, but really 45 minutes is a standard for really good color penetration. Now when you're working with the colors that aren't gray coverage, 30 minutes is our standard processing time. Our high lift colors, we recommend 45 to 55 minutes. I hope you had a great understanding of our color concept, our color ritual, the blonding ritual, and the ProRituals hair coloring cream. If you'd like any questions answered, you could email me directly at terrence@robonda.com or go to our website at www.prorituals.com.